The pleasure of meeting Jeff was in 2018-ish. I was running a workshop on Intro to Agility to a bunch of lovely folks out in East Hanover at Novartis' campus. And that's where I met Jeff. And Jeff and I soon after started working together, collaborating and co-creating the culture that Jeff wanted to see in the environment. And I was trying to support that vision. I'd like to think I supported it a fair way, lots of wins and lots of lessons. And that's what we're going to share with you today. Over to you.
So in any event, what I was explaining was I was running a business service at Novartis, which served our business units and did things like analytics, which is what we'll talk about here, almost as if a vendor would. In fact, in this particular project, we were replacing a vendor. And the folks that were doing the work were, of course, specialized in their work, and they were not based in the US. They were based in India. So that's the second piece that I wanted to mention, going back to my majors, big Swiss pharma company. I talked about pharma. I talked about big. And I think that relative to the setup of the company, the culture, it's a, Novartis is a very structured company. You take structure in even if the structure is not serving a purpose, because that's our default way of doing things. So that'll come into play a little bit as well. Any other context I want to explain?
I think that's good to start with. So we thought we'd do a mini tiny fishbowl. So we're going to take a seat, if I may trouble you. And every now and then we might pick on one of you folks, you lovely folks, to come and join us right here. A bit intimidating sitting between the two of us, but promise we don't bite. What we wanted to talk to you folks about is about our journey together and two major dysfunctions that we've kind of experienced. And the first one, I'm going to hand back over to Jeff, is the collaboration dysfunction, and that's the reason why I got drawn into the conversation. Is that correct, Jeff?
Yes. So when Kubair came in and talked to the leadership team, I was there by accident, and he talked about collaboration. And the basic problem that we had was collaboration. And what we'll talk about is not only how we started the project together, we'll talk about how we tried to scale it. And I like to think of it as how we started the project, I'll explain in a minute, was an outrageous success. How we scaled it was super mixed, and I think that's where we'll get into an interesting discussion. So what was the project? So I mentioned we had a team in India, part of our business services team, that was asked to help build an analytical tool. What this analytical tool did is it helped our biggest business unit in the US figure out how to optimize their commercialization spend on big therapeutics. And I mentioned the two things a pharma company cares about are science and commercialization, so this was pretty important. And we were asked actually to replace the work that a vendor was doing. The vendor would have given a tool to do that optimization and just handed it back. We were asked to build that capability internally, which would have, of course, built a capability that we needed sustainably, but also would have saved a substantial chunk of money for the company. Now, around the time that Kubair gave this talk, the problem we were having is that we had been going for 3 or 4 months and we weren't seeing any results. We're having great meetings, but the tool wasn't getting close to being built. And I had stakeholders in the US that were starting to call me and saying, hey, look, this isn't working. We're going to have to bring in the vendor again. And I realized there was something there that had to be fixed. And when Kubair came and talked about this Agile approach, I saw it as a collaborative tool, and that's when I reached out to Kubair. So I'm going to hand it back.
Thank you very much. This is working? I'm not sure.
No, it's not. I didn't press the button, so this one's
green. It's working.
Okay.
I'm told it's working, so I'm going to assume it's working. So when we started talking, one of the immediate dysfunctions, and I'm sure all of you have experienced it, was the disjoint between business and developers. So the business was literally writing requirements, long documents, and throwing it over the fence. And then going, hey, where's my stuff? It's been about a month, where's my stuff? And the developers were going, well, we're not really entirely clear on what you asked us to do, but here's something that we built, what do you think? And oh my God, this is not what I wanted, right? And the temperature kept going up and up. And obviously, as Jeff said, one of the challenges was the business wasn't seeing output or outcome being achieved. So what we did was we went in there and we said, okay, let's start from a blank canvas and see what would be the best way for us to collaborate. And then obviously we set up some refinement events. We got people together. We had to coach the product owner and the product side of the business, because for them it was like, well, I've told you what I want. So where is it now? And I told you like 3 weeks ago. Why do you want to talk to me? And that was a major shift for the business in terms of, oh, I have to spend time with my developers. I have to do that daily? What, I've got to talk to you on a daily basis? What is that going to achieve? But that shift was really quick in the sense that within a sprint, if I may name the individual, Scott completely got it. Why does he and his team from the business side need to make time on a daily basis to connect with the developers and figure out what they're doing together? And that was, for us, that was a pivotal moment, right? Getting them to understand that this is not a creation process. This is a co-creation process. And the other thing we did was we made those events, those meetings, very purposeful. We got a Scrum Master in place and coached the Scrum Master to make sure that the events were on point, on purpose, not always on time, but they were on point and on purpose, and people coming to those meetings knew exactly what they needed to bring in with them and had some expectation of what they're going to leave following the events. And that started changing the collaboration dysfunction and actually made collaboration functional. And within, I believe it was a 6-sprint, 2-week sprint period, we completely turned around. Top Gun was the name of the team. We completely turned Top Gun around. And now the name suited them. Right? Sprint 1, it didn't really suit them. But Sprint 6, we're like, okay, all the metrics we were getting, all the subjective metrics like, team happiness, business satisfaction, all of them was suddenly off the charts. And with that came our second challenge. So I'm going to hand back to Jeff, which was, excellent, Kubair. Now let's do this in a whole bunch of different places.
So I want to actually spend a little bit on our on Top Gun for a minute, just to highlight a few things that Kubair said, then to talk about the second challenge. But as I said, what we were doing is generating an optimization model to figure out how to spend tens of millions of dollars in the U.S. on commercialization. And this project was commissioned by the Chief Financial Officer of the U.S. And his comment when we presented out after those 6 sprints was, we asked for fire, you gave us electricity, right? It's hard to beat something like that. And I'll also comment that the change that was driven in both sides of the organization was quite profound. And it's one of the things that you look for when you're implementing a global business service, is you change the way in which the customer operates, because now we got them realizing they have to co-create the capability, they have to write down user stories, but you also changed your delivery organization because they now understand and they're close to the strategic work of the business, and they learn tools to help them plan their work better. I mean, we were using things like burn down charts, right? We estimated effort effectively. All that stuff after 6 sprints worked super well. So you look at the output, and you look at the impact, and this Agile thing that I didn't know much about beforehand was obviously a go. So we got a hammer, let's find a whole bunch of nails. So one thing that I want to explain to you that'll come up later on is that Kubair mentioned that we put in place a Scrum Master. Well, we didn't really put in place a Scrum Master. We had a leader who we asked to pick up Scrum Master responsibilities, right? And he ran it as a proper Scrum Master. I'm sure that Kubair's nodding his head, so apparently he passed the sniff test. But that was, that was one of the challenges. So when we saw this project be successful, like, okay, let's go do 3, 4 more. Almost right off the bat, and we don't need to change Kubair. I mean, Kubair can handle it. Kubair did it once, surely he can do it 3 or 4 more times. The team that we had in India could do it a few more times, and we know how to change the minds of the customers in the US.
And therein comes our scaling dysfunction, right? So for me, I think it was about a 6 to 8 period after which I realized that, oh my God, I am overstretched. But my first overstretch moment was actually the individuals that we'd coached up to be our Scrum Masters. That's what kind of bit me, was like, oh, these guys are now working on not 1, 2, 3, 4, but more than 4 teams. And I was like, hang on, I'm working on more than 6 programs. And though I was fairly good at pulling myself back, I'd say it took me probably about a quarter or so, or a little over, to start saying no and saying that, okay, we need to rethink capacity here. But by that time, the dysfunction of taking, you could say, the same team or the same individuals and throwing them at different problems had already set in. So the folks that we trained up to be Scrum Masters were now spread out so thin that they were essentially ineffective. All they were doing was running from one event to the other, running from one team to the other, highlighting impediments, but being unable to actually address them.
And I think, what's worse a little bit, right, is that now you need to step back and think about how global business services operate, and particularly a capability center in a place like India, where we'd hire, folks out of highly competitive educational programs. They're coming to join Novartis, a very well-respected company in India, and folks want to learn in advance. So when we come with this crazy Scrum Master idea, they're thinking to themselves, okay, listen, how do I build up the bullet points that I need in order to convince the organization I should be promoted in 1.5, 2 years, right? So we ran into that challenge as well. So, when the next couple of projects got underway, for the most part, we were able to do the projects, right? And I'll let you fill in some of the gaps. But we were not able to get a sustainable core of people who were Scrum trained and ready to drive. In other words, we probably flattened out after a couple of projects.
We did indeed, and that challenge, to a large extent, kind of like, it stuck with the organization, because the mindset was, okay, we got one good Agile practitioner. Surely they're Agile enough to handle all our problems, right? Because they're Agile, right? And at this moment, what I would like to do is pause for a second and see if anyone in the room, has experienced what we're talking about. Okay, we have, was it Luca? Luca, would you like to come and join us for 2 minutes and just share your narrative with the room, please? This is where we bite.
Good morning, everyone. I joined my current company like 1.5 years ago, and what I experienced that they have implementation of SAP software system, so it was like completely new system for the company. Implementation company was based like in Netherlands, but thing is that they completely don't understand needs of our company. So what I'm doing from the last 1.5 years, I just prove that they say that they do implementation through the Scrum Agile. I proved them that it was like completely like waterfall methodology, so they didn't know what they're talking about. Still, when they finish like have like a resume of the like implementation like last year, they didn't take like any notice, like any critics like from the users. So at the moment we're just like finishing to, not like I'm saying, my approach is not to blame anyone, just treat it as a testing form. It was like a proper like implementation. It was like testing for like 2 years. First of all, because we have like Brexit, and it's like a make like a difference for our business, because we're working very close with the European Union, with the companies in the Europe, and it's delaying like all the processes like between us and them. And we need to start from the beginning. Like we're changing the company as well, like based in India, with the office over here, just to improve everything and like rewrite database, adapting to the situation that we have it like with the Brexit, with the new laws, regulations, and just to speed up everything.
I think there are a number of dysfunctions there, right? We can all relate to. One of the ones that kind of like resonated the most with me was the vendor mindset, right? My V's and W's are all mixed up, so if you're wondering what is, there's people who provide our services, right? So vendor mindset, they'll come in and they'll tell us that we will work exactly, and we experience that as well, how you want us to work. But they don't have the growth mindset, and it's the same. They run Agile, but they actually run waterfall. So it's design sprint. Familiar with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Documentation sprint, build sprint, test sprint. It's like, where's my deliverable? Oh, it's coming at the end of the 6th or the 7th sprint.
Yep.
And what are we providing you feedback on? Well, you're providing us feedback on designs. We just presented you the designs. What do you think? Yeah, but where's my slice of cake? There is no slice of cake. You're going to get the whole cake in about 6, 7 sprints time. That's a major issue with a lot of vendors where they talk the talk, but they don't drink their own champagne. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to be polite here, right? So not referring to dog food, but rather champagne. How did you find that, Jeff, with the vendors? I know we kind of moved away from the vendors.
Yeah, it's so the vendors, for me, when I was back in Novartis, the vendors were our competition. But what's interesting, though, is that the customers were trained to work with vendors, right? Not trained to work with colleagues. And I would say there's a difference, but there really shouldn't be. And the way we saw this vendor treatment in part was, listen, I'm going to write down the brief and I'm going to email it to you, and then in 6 weeks I want my cake, right? So I posit that mindset, it doesn't work with fellow Novartians. Frankly, it didn't work with vendors either. And I love to think in my idle time when I was at Novartis how much money we threw away at ineffectually working with vendors, right? Because at the end of the day, what's important is the work you have to do, not who you do the work with. But that was one mindset that had to be fixed. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier, is that being able to have a scalable Scrum capability, this was one of the defects, is that you need to have people that can have that conversation with your customer and say, you can't work this way, right? If you want to have slices of cake every couple of weeks, you have to be willing to put in the effort to be part of that cake making process. You can't just flip us an email and wait 6 weeks and hope it happens.
Yeah. The other interesting part, the cultural aspect of it, was internal colleagues being treated like vendors. Just because there is a distance between them, just because we don't meet them as often, the treatment was that you're external, I'm paying you to do something, where is that something? And that took a little bit of time and a few difficult conversations to address. We're going to pause here and see if there are any other comments or questions on this segment around dysfunction before we kind of share some of the things that we did to address those. And some of the ideas we've had since, how might have we done things differently?
So you talk about the collaboration dysfunction there. So how did you really engage with your thanks, really. You talk about collaboration dysfunction there. So how did you overcome speaking to your senior executives to get them all on board? Because more often than not, they are our dysfunction.
That's a super good question, and it's one that I've pondered about. Maybe I'll take a crack at it. And by the way, this is a challenge outside of Agile, right? I remember reading. I'm actually lean trained before I went into Agile. So Agile for me was just like putting on a different kind of glove, right? But you run into that problem with lean as well, where the vast majority of lean implementations fail in part because of leadership failures of leadership buy-in. So the approach we took here was more of a guerrilla approach. We started down in the grassroots, right? It was a single project that needed to be rescued. I'm part of the executive leadership team for our function, and I brought in a solution, right? So I was bought in. That's good, especially after our first success. But helping our colleagues understand there's a different way of doing something was much harder, right? And what I tended to get from most of my peers was, especially the key peer who's involved, is this sounds like a good idea. I think it's somewhere in my top 10 priorities to support this, right? Which means that it wasn't going to get the attention it needed, right? And you're actually asking a question, Shelby, that's going to get to how we think through this a little, what we learn from it, how we think through it. Because going to leadership, I did try multiple times, by the way, didn't give us the ability to scale. And I'll tell you why. I think there's two reasons. I think one is the leaders, you don't really understand something like lean or agile until you gemba, right? Until you see it. If you don't see it, you don't get it. The likelihood you're going to get an executive to go and see it is not high, right? I think the second problem is that the mistake I probably made many mistakes here, but one of the mistakes in this case that comes into play is I went and I said, hey, look, dear colleague, this is what you need. You need some Scrum Masters. Do you have any money lying around for Scrum Masters? No, of course she doesn't have money lying around for Scrum Masters, right? So that, and if you think about it, if you're relying on spending more money to scale, that's going to be a problem, right? So that wasn't going to get off the ground immediately. And, I got lip service initially, but then eventually the roles never appeared, right?
And that's kind of like true for all organizations, right? You'll get one or two leaders. So I was lucky in the sense that I had Jeff on my side. My sponsor was there, so whenever I did something that was guerrilla or a little pirate, Jeff actually loved it, right? But another advantage we kind of had was we had some leaders in HQ who supported. We had some leaders within the Indian leadership who supported and understood. But the problem with leaders is they don't have the patience, right? They might give us the support, but they might not have the patience. They might have the patience, but then they don't have pockets deep enough to provide the needed support. So it's very rare that we find leaders who have both the patience and the support. And that's where a lot of coaching needs to go in. That's where a lot of conversations need to go in. That look, and so I'll kind of like digress a little. So another pharma related to yours, your ex-pharma. So I got called in by two leaders who go like, Kubair, we hired you like 3 weeks ago, and now we got more problems than we began with. So what's going on? And I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, you're creating a lot of these problems. Like, we don't know what's going on. Like, there was like one issue we brought you in to solve, but now we find out there are like fires all over the place. What are you doing? I was like, well, all I'm doing is holding up a silver mirror, right? And asking your teams to look into it and see what they see. And they were like, yeah, well, we hired you to bring some silver bullets. It's like, dude, you don't have, werewolves and witches and warlocks for me to kill. So silver bullets don't work over here. Silver mirror does. And they kind of got it, right? And they asked me, like, what do you need? And I was like, patience? Because you're giving me the support, you're giving me the budgets, you're giving me the people to bring this to life, but I'm not seeing a lot of patience. So the answer was like, would 2 weeks work? I was like, that's one sprint. So I was like, okay, how about you give me 4 sprints? And then we have this conversation. And we were able to go back and demonstrate something within 3 sprints, to which it became, you asked for 4, you gave me something in 3, so now we're going to see more results in like maybe 2 or 1. We're like, look, we're out of the hangar, we've taken flight, we're catching altitude, so yes, you're going to start seeing stuff. So the thing I always say to leaders is be patient and give us support.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something else that I think is an unfortunate problem in a lot of management cultures is leaders tell their people, hey, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions, right? And I think that is like the worst leadership behavior that I've seen, because when you shine the mirror and you see all these ugly problems, people, leaders get stressed, right? And you have to empathize with them because they don't know any better than to get stressed when they see the problems. Then they want them fixed, right? And we aren't taught enough to love the problem. And the same thing happened here, right? Initially, with that very first Top Gun, we shown the mirror. I was like, oh my God! I mean, we're already late, and now you're telling us it's going to be further later because we have to solve all these problems, right? And you have to get past that. I think coming back to the problem we had in scaling, we were able to get a couple of projects done. Right, and some of them were analytic oriented, some of them are less analytic oriented, right? And I have to emphasize, what we did is primarily a business agility exercise. We made it sound technical, but it's not so technical as other projects might be. And we were able to get them done because we did, Kubair was effective in training some folks in how to run scrums, but not all of them were effective. And we obviously weren't going to get a core of trained scrum masters. We tried. And when it was clear that some projects weren't up and running, we did what is a big pharma answer, which is we tried putting in governance. And let's have more meetings and understand how, to make people accountable for getting things done. And that that made it even worse, frankly, right? So that's not the answer. So one of the things that we talked about is we realized, okay, you need a Scrum leadership capability, but does it need to be a role? No, no, it doesn't, right? So we thought in the aftermath of this, what we probably ought to have done is to change the role profiles in such a way as they accommodated Scrum capabilities in the appropriate roles, right? And that might have been a more scalable episode because at the end of the day, you're doing more work, you still have to hire more capability, but it would be in the natural course of business rather than hiring dedicated personnel.
The key thing is, as we all know in this room, right, is paradigm shift. It's the mindset shift. Now, how we approach it is really important because if we approach it full on, it's counterproductive. So if I go to leaders and say, hey, I want you to have a pull mentality rather than a push, guess what? I'm already pushing stuff on them. So we need to put it out in front of them, i.e. make it transparent. And then, slowly and steadily invite them towards it. So it's by drinking our own champagne, right? So for instance, at Novartis, when we first started the program 2018, we ran Scrum-like board meetings so that the senior leadership gets a flavor for what exactly is it that we're trying to get their people to do. So I'd say when it comes to like large organizations, and I don't want to just single out Novartis, but all the large enterprises I've been at, where you do get leadership support, it's great. And you do get operational and tactical support, it's great because you're working your way bottom up and top down. But where things usually go and kind of fizzle out or die is middle management, right? So that's where I try and focus more of my attention because, look, the leaders have already decided to bring in a bunch of coaches or a bunch of product coaches or agile coaches, spend money to make things different, right? So we have their support. They might not be there with patience and a lot of time to get their hands dirty, but hey, they've hired us, so we're there, right? We're working with the operational teams, work with those that pull on the invitation as opposed to pushing Scrum or Agile ways of working on them. But the focus really should be on that middle tier. How do we get them more and more involved and accepting of the change that we're trying to bring? And thank you very much. Any questions?
Quick question. You mentioned Scrum. Scrum-like
It looks like a 4-week sprint for the executive committee. It looks like a backlog of impediments that they need to solve for their people, not in silos, but as a team-shaped executive committee. So you and me need to solve my problem together. We need to pair up on it. It looks like having once-a-week stand-ups or scrums, right? 15 minutes, quick alignment on what's going on. It means like we're planning our month. What are the impediments we want to handle? It means we're having a review where we might invite senior managers or we might invite other stakeholders who are not part of this executive committee. It means having an earnest and honest retrospective. And then it means what are we going to change next month as a team of 12, 13 leaders and how we're engaging with our coaches to bring the change that we want them to bring. Does that help?
It does, but I suppose who facilitated that? And what was the feedback from that's particular stuff we were talking about, or is it they're like, oh, we get it?
So the first sprint was painful. I was the Scrum Master for the first 3 months. So we rotated the Scrum Masters. The first sprint was extremely painful because it's a room full of alphas, right? And it's a hard to control room. And there's a very fine balance that we need to keep between, being super aggressive with a bunch of super aggressive people, because that can go sideways really quickly. But very quickly, they understood that what we're trying to do is get them to drink their own champagne, albeit from our bottles. So they did get it. Thank you. So, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, sorry.
You mentioned the business development teams every day. How did that look and what did you do to implement that?
So we said, look, after our daily scrums, we're going to keep half an hour aside. So firstly, we had to align on our time zones, right? So New Jersey and Hyderabad in India. And then we said this half an hour, we want you as product owners and the BA and their proxies to be available, right? We might call on you, so just be there on MS Teams or on Slack. So when I call on you, then that half an hour is ours. We need your time. More often than initially, it was top heavy. So we needed them pretty much every day, right? But as we progressed past sprint 2, sprint 3, and the team started settling in and understanding more about the what is it that they want us to do, it became less frequent.
Right. No. We're available for questions. We're not going anywhere. At least I'm not.
You can grab us outside.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.